I'm going to do it day by day and do the best we can to get justice for our daughter, and that's what's on my mind after I get my daughter to rest.
Tonight, a vigil for Eishia Hudson is held in Winnipeg after last week's police shooting.
The most appropriate thing for us to do is to take our direction from the Chief Medical Officer and to ensure that we work with all our First Nations.
And concerns over COVID as mining continues in the Yukon. Good evening, I'm Brittany Hobson. The family of Eishia Hudson gathered in Winnipeg over the weekend to honor the 16-year-old. Police shot and killed the teen last week after an alleged liquor store robbery. Here is more on the vigil. A makeshift memorial of flowers and photos sits at the intersection where Winnipeg police shot and killed Eishia Hudson. On Sunday, family of the 16-year-old gathered to honor the teen who died on April 8th. Christy Zabrowski remembered her daughter fondly.
Aisha was a very outgoing, loving, caring, put everybody above her. She had direction. She was a strong, independent woman, girl.
Dozens of family, friends, and allies paid their respects. With physical distancing rules in place, many stayed in their cars and watched from the side of the road. At one point, the group shut down the intersection with a round dance. William Hudson welcomed the support while he tries to come to terms with his daughter's death.
I'm going to do it day by day and do the best we can to get justice for our daughter, and that's what's on my mind after I get my daughter to rest.
Police say Hudson was part of a group of teens who allegedly stole a vehicle and robbed a liquor store in the south end of the city last week. They say the teen was driving the vehicle when it crashed. While police attempted to arrest the youth, Hudson was shot.
She was loved. She impacted, obviously, a lot of people. And I want it to be known that Winnipeg Police did wrong to my daughter.
Throughout the vigil, many took to social media to express concerns about police limiting access to the event, including NDP MP Leah Gazan, who tweeted, "Tried to attend the vigil for Eishia Hudson, however the police had the area blocked off." Police have denied these claims, saying they only blocked vehicles from driving through the area to ensure safety of pedestrians. In light of the pandemic, the family are also hosting 2 small services this week. Ottawa, the COVID-19 Cabinet Committee says the spread of the disease is slowing. They also gave some insight into a new test useful for remote communities. Jamie Pashagumskum has this.
The new tests are being developed by Ottawa-based Spartan Biomedical. They are handheld devices that will give results on the spot. Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Theresa Tam, says they will be useful in remote communities where test results have a long turnaround time.
Well, I think it will make a lot of difference to areas that have less access right now to the turnaround time. In terms of the supplies, this is dynamic, as we all know, depends on lots of different moving parts, but the procurement contract itself is trying to secure supply of the devices with 40,000 units per month in the upcoming months, and then see how that progresses in terms of the sort of supply rate.
Tam said the rate of infection is slowing and Canadians are breaking the chains of transmission, but now is not the time to relax measures.
We know that physical distancing works to reduce the number of people who get infected, and once low enough, the epidemic will run out of fuel. One thing is certain: if we want a best case scenario, we need to give it our best efforts. We cannot prevent every death, but we must prevent every death we can. We need to protect our seniors. So stay home and save lives, and let's give our best effort to plank the curve, then crush it.
The government also announced new guidelines for long-term care facilities, where around half of COVID-19 deaths in Canada have occurred. Workers will now be screened before shifts, they'll wear masks, and the areas where they work inside the facilities will be limited. Jamie Pashagumskum, APTN National News, Ottawa.
There are now at least 43 cases of COVID-19 in First Nation communities. Kettle and Stony Point First Nation Chief Jason Henry announced today that 2 new cases have been confirmed in the community. The news comes just days after the chief celebrated a recovery by the first known case on Thursday.
It's pretty glum times when that fell upon our community, but hooray today for our survivor, our recovered patient. So that's really good news, really good news for the community. I'm pretty excited about that. I'm going to go over and check on him today and see him on his way as he makes his way home to, be safe and sound and celebrate the recovery of another milestone in his life.
In Saskatchewan, the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations and several chiefs want the province to close all liquor stores for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's Priscilla Wolf with more.
Grocery and drug stores in Saskatchewan are considered essential services, and so are liquor stores. FSIN Vice Chief Heather Bear says those stores are not essential, and keeping them open is hurting communities.
The efforts of COVID, we know that our communities are in crisis and doing their best to, respond to their pandemic plans. But I think where the frustration is with leadership and community is some members are not complying and continuing to gather and having house parties and these types of events still taking place.
The lockdowns on communities is increasing bootlegging and unnecessary contact. Chief of the James Smith Cree Nation, Chief Wally Burns, supports FSIN and other chiefs who want to close the liquor stores.
I'm hearing from my security that people phone in and then they try to sneak off the reserve. Some succeed, some didn't.
Chief Burns says even with lockdowns, people are finding ways to get alcohol.
They didn't leave the reserve, that's the thing. They're finding ways and means to have people come with, ATVs or skidoos and then, things like that.
Vice Chief Bear realizes that there are people with addictions and to cut them off cold turkey can be unhealthy. But she says the alternative is worse.
In our communities, we know that there's so many that are wounded with alcoholism. That's a problem, and with the essential services being put on pause now, we're looking at the issue of withdrawals and not having that capacity there and the limited resources. There's 2 sides to the coin on this one. I'm not promoting keeping liquor stores open, but we do have another issue at hand on top of COVID. The withdrawals and lack of services and treatment centers.
APTN asked the provincial government for a comment on the FSIN's request, but so far they haven't responded. Priscilla Wolf, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
The Navajo Nation in the southern United States is one of the hot spots for the COVID-19 virus. The nation has the largest reservation in the United States. They announced that so far there have been 698 confirmed cases and 24 deaths. About 40% of residents have no access to running water, which makes washing hands difficult. About 200,000 people live on the reservation, which stretches across 3 states. The nation has started a curfew from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. daily to prevent people from gathering. Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez says the number of people who are infected will increase even more as more test kits become available.
We're all working hard to fight for our citizens. It's quite disheartening that leaders have to be pitted against one another for getting finite resources like gloves and masks, personal protection equipment. We're trying to raise the awareness that the first citizens of this country are in a way being left at the bottom of the list.
Time for a quick break. Coming up, First Nations in the Yukon are calling for a halt on mining during the pandemic. Here is Tuesday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. 8 above in St. John's, 7 in Halifax, 2 degrees in Nain, 1 in Happy Valley Goose Bay, some sun and 7 in Montreal, 5 in Quebec City, in Peterborough 4 degrees, in London 4 and sunny, -2 in Wawa, 1 degree in Thunder Bay, In northern Manitoba, -10 in Churchill, -3 in Norway House. In Gimli, -2 and some sun. In Winnipeg, -3. In Saskatchewan, 0 degrees in Regina, Saskatoon, and Estevan. -2 in La Ronge, 2 above in Buffalo Narrows. Welcome back. A national women's advocacy group launched a campaign in hopes that funds to address domestic violence and homelessness will reach those who need it most. Elena McDougall explains.
No one should have to choose between getting COVID-19 and escaping homelessness and violence, a national advocacy group says. A federal investment of $207 million to address housing needs and gender-based violence is welcome news, according to the National Women's Housing and Homelessness Network. But they want to ensure that women have a voice in how that money will be spent.
So we really launched this campaign knowing that the federal funding was coming, and we wanted to ensure that women's voices were at the table, and specifically that Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse folks' housing needs were really central to this response to the pandemic.
The network asks all levels of government to put a moratorium on evictions and acquire hotel and motel spaces on an urgent and priority basis. Calls from Indigenous women for help are up amid the COVID-19 crisis, but vulnerability should not be confused for a lack of strength, says a network co-chair.
Technology has really brought women out of the shadows, community women out of the shadows, who have really gained strength in saying, this is what our life is like, and this is what we need, and this is how you need to support us. And they're no longer so willing to live with the crumbs from the table, and they're not so willing to live with, the charity model that would try to disempower them. So I'm so intent on making sure Indigenous people and Indigenous women self-determine the supports they get.
In addition to providing safe spaces, the network is calling for a national advisory body to guide and monitor policy responses to COVID-19. Funds are expected to arrive in the coming weeks, and they say that without gender-informed and intersectional voices who carry the wisdom of lived experiences, even the best intentions may not be enough. Elena McDougall, APTN National News, Hamilton.
The Northwest Territories is putting together a compliance and enforcement task force to help carry out social distancing in communities. A 30-person team will be ensuring residents are following government COVID-19 orders and restrictions. Charlotte Moore-Jacobs explains.
Residents across the Northwest Territories will begin to see government workers in their communities. They'll be ensuring COVID-19 self-isolation and physical distancing rules are being followed.
There was a direct response from concerns raised through Indigenous governments and local governments. We do have a weekly regular call with Indigenous and local governments. That's the WT Association of Communities. And enforcement was one of their top priorities.
The NWT closed their border 2 weeks ago, and anyone returning north must hand in a self-isolation plan to government.
If the Hay River, Fort Smith, Inuvik, or Yellowknife are not their destination, they're required to go to an isolation center. And so compliance with self-isolation order applies to everyone. And if we do hear complaints, if people are not staying at home, or if they're in a situation where they can put the public at risk, these complaints are being investigated.
Task force officers will have the power to investigate breaches of the Public Health Act and Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Cami Condola's orders. It will be led by Conrad Bates, who comes from the Department of Lands.
Primarily, the officers in the regional centers will be investigating complaints that are coming in through the NWT Protect line. Obviously, the more frequently we're out and about and in the communities, there is that public presence as well. At the end of the day, once they've determined through an investigation that a complaint is verified, then it's incumbent upon them and at their discretion to take whatever action that they deem necessary.
Regional centers would see 2 to 3 officers, and smaller communities 1 officer. backed by RCMP members and municipal enforcement.
Something along the lines of stern talking to, verbal warning, written warnings are part of the toolkit. They have the ability to issue tickets as well as, and also compel somebody to court at a later date as well.
In March, there were over 150 incidents of non-compliance that were reported in the territory. The hope is the task force will bring those numbers down. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
As the COVID-19 pandemic shuts down businesses across the country, construction on the Coastal GasLink pipeline in northern BC is moving ahead. And Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs are upset that pipeline construction is continuing. Large sections of pipes are being brought into the Morris West Forest Service Road near Houston, BC. Construction and industrial camps were labeled essential services by the province. Gedebten spokesperson Molly Wickham says they are concerned over COVID-19 spreading. Wet'suwet'en are following social distancing guidelines, but say they are witnessing high volumes of Coastal GasLink workers in the territory.
An increased amount of CGL and RCMP activity in the territory. We're seeing a lot of pipes come in by truck that are all being stored on the territory. They're taking full advantage of the fact that everybody else is isolated and following proper protocol safety precautions.
Despite COVID concerns and border restrictions, many miners are still coming into the Yukon to work, and some First Nation communities worry those miners could be putting their members at risk. Chris McIntyre has more.
Members of the remote community of Beaver Creek are worried about the potential spread of COVID-19 as miners travel into Yukon for work.
We are a border community with the state of Alaska. We're going to be seeing an influx of staff or personnel from the mining sector. We're literally the town by the customs. How do we keep our members safe?
There are about 159 active placer mines in Yukon. Two of the biggest mines are the Minto Mine and Victoria Gold's Eagle Project, which are located close to the communities of Mayo and Pelly. The Yukon government has imposed some restrictions on miners coming to the territory. Workers must now isolate themselves in Whitehorse for 14 days prior to heading to camp. Once on site, workers are told to stay on longer than the normal 2 weeks in, 2 weeks out shift to eliminate shift change crossovers. Janet Vandermeer, the lands director from the White River First Nation, thinks no miners should be allowed in at all.
I do not want to see a scenario where a community remote near a mining company having to deal with death, illness. We're a very small territory. I don't want to see that happen.
She recently sent a letter to the Premier's office asking him to suspend all mining activity during this pandemic.
Emotions are running high, really high. The Yukon government doesn't need to have this shame on them for allowing this mining sector to continue and wait for something to happen. And I think, and I believe with the Yukon government, we're always waiting. And with the pandemic, you don't have the time to wait.
Mr. Speaker, Minister of Energy, Mines and Resources Ranj Pillay says he understands the concerns from the First Nations, but the Yukon government has no plans to shut down any mines.
We know that people are fearful, and the number one thing is to make sure that our communities are healthy and our elders are healthy. But in some cases, the most appropriate thing for us to do is to take our direction from the Chief Medical Officer and to ensure that we work with all our First Nations.
Vandermeer says she's disappointed mining will continue in the territory, and she's worried it will be the community members that pay the price.
I'm trying to be clear to say to the government to stop a sector, an industry, while we are under a state of emergency to help ease this pandemic on our traditional territory. It is very straightforward, but don't bring the politics into it.
Chris McIntyre, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
One Ojibwe artist is putting his talents online to help combat boredom during the pandemic. More on that after the break. Here is the rest of Tuesday's weather forecast, starting in northern Alberta. 3 degrees in Fort McMurray and Grand Prairie. 7 above in Calgary. 4 in Red Deer. 13 in sun in Vancouver. 17 above in Campbell River. 12 and cloudy in Smithers, 9 in Prince George. In the Yukon, sunny 8 degrees in Dawson, 10 in Whitehorse. Over to the NWT, -2 in Yellowknife, 8 above in Trout Lake. Cloud and -1 in Colville Lake, -8 in Sax Harbor. In Nunavut, -12 with some sun in Baker Lake, -13 in Repulse Bay. -8 in Clyde River, -12 and some sun in Arctic Bay. Need an activity for the kids while self-isolating? Well, a Toronto-based artist has published several coloring books that are available online for free. The books are also a great way to learn Indigenous languages. Tamara Pimentel has the story.
I've been painting, I would say, since grade 10. I've always kind of
Patrick Hunter started painting at a young age, but never thought it would turn into this. The Two-Spirit Ojibwe artist and graphic designer has made a name for himself with his woodland art style. Hunter has collaborations with companies like BMO and Staples and became the first artist in residence for the Prince's Trust Canada.
Don't know if I ever started out this life wanting to be an artist, but as an artist I was always like, what am I doing? What am I doing to contribute to the greater good and stuff like that? Painting pictures for people's walls is fun and everything, and it's a pretty good feeling, but being able to contribute in a bigger way, using something that I'm good at.
Now his work is being used to help revitalize Indigenous languages. Hunter turned his colorful artwork into coloring books, available in Ojibwe, Swampy Cree, and Oji Cree.
The first 2 weeks or something, I think it got about 1,500 shares on social media. Kind of blown away by that. It feels good. I've definitely been getting some pictures and stuff and tags on social media about what their kids are up to. Even and like I said, even adults are into it as well.
And during a time that families are stuck indoors, the books can be found online and printed for free.
That's a whole new level of oh, okay, I'm doing something that is, I hope, helping in some way to kind of revitalize some language.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Calgary.
That's your news for this Monday. Stay up to date with the very latest on COVID-19 by visiting our special page, aptnnews.ca/COVID-19. I'm Brittany Hobson, but before we go, here's one creative way people are adapting to the pandemic. Cross Turtle Island events have been cancelled, but the Peel River Jamboree in Fort McPherson, Northwest Territories, won't let COVID-19 stop them.